guys, welcome to another episode of Shadow Vibes. I'm your host, Sir Leader. In last month's video, I provided a box reveal of all the computer components a person would need in order to build their very first custom computer. In today's video, I'll be taking those same components mentioned and teach you guys how to build a custom dream machine. But don't worry, this video is for beginners. Even though this computer build is of my choosing, I still intend to keep things simple, so that even those that are new to the hobby can feel like they've got this. Now that the introductions are out of the way, let's get started. If you are new to building custom PCs, you probably purchased a case that requires almost no assembly. I, however, chose the Thermaltake P3 T6 Snow Edition. If you haven't seen my previous video that talks about how this case came in its box, go check it out. The link is in the description down below. Now, rather than skip through the construction process of the case, I decided I would show you guys, for those that are interested in knowing what the job entails. But don't worry, I'll speed through most of it. When starting off with your build, look for tiny threaded pegs that come with your motherboard. My motherboard is an ATX model, which came with 9 pegs. These pegs are what your motherboard sits on when mounted to the case. One of the first things you should do when starting is screw these pegs into the case in their proper holes. The easiest way to know which ones is to place your motherboard in the case and mark which holes will be used for the screws. There are holes in your motherboard where these pegs will line up. Be sure to hand screw and tighten. Do not use tools for this. Now, why did I choose this case? There are a few things, really. Again, check out my previous video, link in the description below, which details my reasoning. However, to summarize, the case can be mounted to a wall using a TV mount. It's also USB 3.0 ready. Not only is it air cooling compatible, but it's also liquid cooling compatible. I won't be using liquid cooling, but I intend to down the road. Lastly, my case is gonna look awesome with all my LED components on full display. Anyways, let's move on to the actual build process, starting with the motherboard. For this motherboard, it's gonna go right on top of those 9 pegs that I installed. There are 9 holes that fit perfectly with those pegs for an ATX model motherboard. If you'll also notice, there are these 2 brackets sitting right here. They were not originally on the motherboard whenever I showed it on last video. I went ahead and installed them. They connect to this back side right here. As you can see, there's a bracket that was not there before. This bracket is specifically for my Thermaltake dual cooling fan that you will see in a little bit. The reason I went ahead and assembled it was because it is a 2012 model cooling fan, and some of those fans today, they're assembled differently. And if you're a first-time user, why should I be wasting my time, wasting your time, putting together something that is not assembled that way anymore today? So a lot of the liquid cooling devices, even some of the fans that come with chips, they have little pop-in inserts that you just push a button, they go through the hole and they hold in place. Really simple. This was a little bit, it required screws, required spacers, things like that, and brackets to hold everything together because this is a large cooling fan that we'll be showing here in a little bit. So I skipped that. I also already tested everything out to make sure it works. So when we go to talk about the processor chip, the i7-9700K that I bought, I went ahead and already applied some of the gel on it. With any CPU cooling unit, anything that needs to be applied to the CPU chip comes with thermal paste. And it's a little tube, looks like a little injector, and it does not take much. Mine is a Thermaltake brand. It came with my air cooler. Still works, it's not hard, but this is what's needed to be in between the plate that the cooling device is connected to and then the chip itself. It's an in-between. You don't want to apply too much that it's oozing out the sides. You want just enough to cover majority of that surface. If you apply too little, it doesn't get a good bond and it can overheat. So this is strictly meant as a transfer between the two metal pieces that are touching to help that heat transfer. So it's a thermal paste. So as you can see right here, I did that for my processor chip. The motherboard comes with a plastic cover. All brand new motherboards come with a plastic cover over where the processor chip goes. I already took it off, but here it is just so you can see. Simply applies there whenever you open up the processor chip, that just falls right out. You will release this lever right here, and as you release it, you'll lift up and the whole thing pops open. There's a plastic chip or plastic cover, and you'll just remove that. Put that inside your motherboard box that it came in if you're gonna keep it. If not, put that somewhere where you won't lose it. Put it with your computer supplies, put it in a desk drawer if you need to. The reason we hang on to that is if you decide that you wanna sell the motherboard down the road, or you want to trade it in, do something with it where the motherboard is still gonna be used, you want that processor location protected. It's the only reason to keep it. Now, when inserting this processor chip, the back side, this is the brains right here. You want to make sure that that is facing down onto the motherboard. There's also a notch on this side and a notch on that side. That is going to line up. When you look at the actual location where it goes, there are some notches built specifically for that. It is very difficult to tell. There's also another way to look at it, but there's two notches here. And then also, you'll notice by looking around the perimeter, you'll find this itty bitty little dot right here. I'm not even gonna bother trying to show you on the camera. The notches should be enough when you're looking. But if you can't find notches, if you're having difficulty, there is that little dot lines up with a little arrow that is right here. So line those up and it should just stop right in. Don't force anything. It's very delicate. But you just get it like that. Drop that over it, it slides in place. You might, when you're first applying it, you might feel some tension. You might even hear some noises. Don't worry about that as long as you put it right where it belongs. That's just making sure the pins are actually going into their little slots. Now, as you can see, processor chip is in and it's ready to go. Next step is gonna be making sure that the motherboard is attached to your case. So every motherboard or the case itself comes with screws that came also with the pins. So the little stands that this motherboard sits on, those little pegs, these screws are specifically meant for them. With these tiny screws comes a little bit of patience. You might drop them, might not. If you have a lightly magnetic screw, you don't want a strong one, but if you have a lightly magnetic screwdriver, it really helps. So while applying the screws onto the motherboard, there's another step that I want to bring up. This is the back panel of your motherboard, which would also be on the back of your computer case. My case is unique because I don't have a back side that this would attach to. Typically, you would place it where you need it and make sure it lines up with where your motherboard would be. whether it's this way or this way. And you're gonna punch it into the back panel until it clicks. And then that's all there is to it. Your motherboard's gonna ride right up to it and hold in place. You're good to go. For this particular instance, I'm gonna do things a little bit differently. If you notice right here, that does not look that great. It's kind of see-through, there's a lot of space in between. It's just not very friendly. So to combat that, I'm going to put this thing on here. I've already applied this screw right here, and I'm going to bring this, apply it exactly as it needs to onto the back of my motherboard, and then I'm going to ride it up against these two things. It's not exactly meant to do that, but I'm doing that because I want it to look good. We're going to line it up. And this piece right here, this pole, and then this right here is going to apply the pressure to hold that in place. I have this on, I've applied the pressure, and now I'm going to put the screws in. They're really hard to put together at times, so I am going to fast forward through this just a little bit so you can see me actually screwing them on place. And you want to hand screw. You definitely don't want to use a power drill or anything like that. You want to hand screw until it's tight and stop. The reason you don't want to use power drills is because you don't want to break the motherboard. You also don't want to strip the screws, and you don't want to strip the peg. Doing any of that will result in having difficulty removing the motherboard in the future. I also forgot a step. Let me tell you about this. There is a wristband you can buy that attaches to something that is grounded. If you live in a very dry area or it's winter time whenever you're building, you're gonna want to have one of these static electric bands. Put it around your wrist and you attach it to something that's grounded and you're totally fine. In the event that you don't have something like that and you wanna still build, touch something that's metal and grounded before you touch the computer. All of these components are so touchy that if you present some kind of static shock, you risk destroying some kind of diode or some kind of device within each component, and it's useless. It becomes a brick at that point, essentially. So avoid static discharge onto any computer components when you are building computers. Normally I wouldn't have to hold the motherboard the way I was, but in this event, because I'm trying to put this thing right here, that required a little bit of effort to push this over here so I could get that screw in. Normally, again, like I said, you wouldn't have to do that. So. Now, after you have finished installing your motherboard, placing all 9 screws, if you're using ATX, in the proper place. As you can see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all placed in. I went ahead and made sure my bracket was nice and firm up against this. The next step that I like to do immediately following is to install my direct SSD, the M.1 SSD card. It'll go right here, and then also my RAM cards, which will go right here. The reason I like to do them now is because my cooling fan, once installed, kind of obstructs my ability to easily install the RAM card and SSD. Taking care of them now saves the headache. I'm gonna go ahead and whip out my RAM and my SSD card here, the M.2 SSD card. Now this one requires that I place a screw right here. It's a little pin, just like the ones that are in the motherboard underneath holding up the stand. You want to screw it in. There's different sizes, and this one is a 2280, and so I'm going to screw in the pin right there, so that way when the SSD card is inserted, it rests right on top and I can screw it in perfectly without any pressure hurting the joint right here. So go ahead and do that. I have my M.2 SSD and I have the screw for it. Now the trick with this is when you're installing your SSD, you just kind of want to push it in until you hear that pop that it went in. You don't need to have it too high up. You don't want it completely flat. You want it to just pop right in at an angle, and it's going to rest upward, and you just want to push it down until it's right on top of that little stand, and this itty bitty little screw is going to hold it in place. Again, a magnetic screwdriver really helps with the size and these little screws in case you drop them. And I just screw it in, hand tight, and it's done. That's it for the SSD. That's done. Way more complicated when you have to use the standard drives with the cords or the hard drives that are mechanical. So there's a little bit more involved with those. Next is the RAM. Now, for these RAM cards, I chose Vendant's RGB Pro. So they are going to be lighting up. Now, what is it about DDR4 versus DDR3, you ask? Not wanting to get complicated, but I want you to know these are DDR4. There's a difference on where this notch is that's in this RAM card. So if you're using DDR3 motherboard, they're not going to connect well with a DDR4 RAM. You're going to need a different card, a DDR3, to be able to connect. So these are DDR4. They will line up inside these slots perfectly. Now, if you'll notice on here, I have a gray, I have a black, a gray, and a black. These are where your RAM cards go. Your gray, you want to have, if you have 2 RAM cards, they both go in gray first. Then if you have more, if you get 2 more cards, you'll go in black. You don't want to put them just side by side. You do have to have them on where it's color coordinated because the computer responds better that way. Again, keeping it simple. So you make sure it fits just right. If it's not lining up, like right now I can see it's not lining up, need to turn it around. Then I'll notice that the notch lines up with the little notch that's on the slot. So I'm just going to go right there. This is pulled back. By it being pulled back, when I go to insert this and I apply pressure, it clicks in place. Done. Moving on to the next RAM card, same thing. Make sure it lines up, make sure this little piece is pulled back, and it clicks in place, and you're done with the RAM. So next is going to be the SSD card that I will be attaching right here. You have your choices, and you have more choices on the back. I personally want to have my SSD card fitting right here because this is where the SATA slots are. There's a spot here that looks the same shape as these right here. That's how you know it's the SATA cables. Everything else looks different. And then my SATA cable choice that I'm going to be using is blue. If you noticed in the video, the last video, mine was green. Joke's on you, I decided to change afterwards. I realized that everything in this room is white, gray, and there's touches of blue, like a glowing blue. I just decided, hey, might as well just go blue. I actually had 3 of these. They are UV reactive, and so they will light up and glow after with the black light effect. I decided to use that. With the SATA cable, I will be connecting my SSD card to the motherboard. For installing this SSD card, you're going to want to have 4 screws, and they are very tiny. They come with the motherboard or the case. In this one, they came with the case because the brackets that these SSD cards attach to are part of the case. To install it, I'm going to need to prop my motherboard up. For my solid state drive, I'm going to want to install it with the cable side facing up. Now this is a vertical install and the brackets are built into the case. If by chance you purchase a case that does not have brackets, which is common with some of the more basic case models, you can purchase some hard drives that come with it, or you can purchase brackets for solid state drive, or if you want to go traditional with the mechanical ones because they're cheaper, you can purchase those brackets on Amazon, things like that, for your case. When you install SATA cables, you hear a click, and that's how you know you got it connected. You'll hear the same thing on the motherboard, and it's the same exact end. It's kind of a little L shape that connects onto the motherboard, and same on this device. There's also another part on here that'll be for your power supply. But I am wanting to have it up top because I want to show off my SATA cable, and it's just a personal choice for me to do it this way. I was able to actually see the cable a little bit more. Most people would actually prefer to hide their cables. If you don't intend on having a glow-in-the-dark look or anything like that, or colorful SATA cables and you want to hide them, cable management is a big deal with cases. And a lot of it is behind the scenes, you don't see it. And so make sure you have zip ties and make sure you have a clear direction on where you want to go and you have enough centimeters, inches, whatever metric form that you choose for measuring. Just make sure you have enough of a line to get to where you need to, going through the different holes that are available on the case. So I'm going to use the screws that came with my case to install the SSD card. And as you can see, the SATA cable goes in. I have an L-shaped SATA cable, an elbow, which helps with the turn, because a lot of times you'll run out of space if you don't have that L shape and you have a large case, for example. Sometimes it's a little bit of a tight fit and you might not be able to get your cable all the way to the motherboard just because of that elbow, the way it has to turn to lock in. So finding L-shaped SATA cables, at least on one end, really makes it worthwhile, trust me. So I just connect the other side to the motherboard, and that's it. The only thing that's missing from this hard drive now is the power source. So moving on to the next item. Next, the moment y'all have all been waiting for, is my air cooling unit, which is a Thermaltake FreeOAK from 2012. This bad boy is beautiful. It was, from what everyone believes, there was no actual confirmation from the creator, but everyone believes it was meant to go off the look of StarCraft. The video game StarCraft 2, which came out 2009, I believe. It came out, and shortly after StarCraft 2's sequel, expansion pack I should say, came out. And this thing came out shortly after, and it's meant to look like a bunker. Just fun facts, whatever. It's got blue fans on both sides that are transparent. They do not light up. There is no LED in this. And the way this unit works is it completely separates from the actual cooling unit itself. I've already applied, like I showed you, the thermal paste to the CPU chip, so this thing will be ready to go. But because it separates, it allows my fan to be easily cleaned. This thing can easily be cleaned, and then of course it'll be connected to the motherboard for control with the fan speed. But let me go ahead and install this for you. So by keeping the fan off, it allows me to be able to make direct connection, lining it up using these brackets, and I'm going to just screw this in. Now this is an extra step that not all cooling devices use, but I really wanted to use this one. It requires a little bit of pressure because there are coils in these screws. It really allows a forced connection onto this device. Okay, once that's done, I go ahead and slide my case onto the actual device. Now, there's a rule of thumb a lot of people want to go by, and that is brand is a good decision maker on which direction to face your blades. Also, with a lot of fans today, you'll find arrows that point which direction the airflow goes. So whenever you're installing any fan, whether it's a desktop fan for the front of the case or the back of the case, always be aware of the direction of the flow. With my case having no sides, no top, no bottom, there's gonna be a lot of airflow and it's not gonna overheat that much. So there's no reason for case fans. That is the one thing about this video that I can't show you in this build because I don't need it. But most cases that are complete cases, they already come pre-built, they will come with 2 to 3 fans already installed. If you happen to uninstall them and put in some that have LED lights, just be aware of that arrow. That will really help you understand the airflow. If you have a fan that does not have an arrow, you can test it whenever it's turned on by putting up a piece of paper to it and finding out if it's gonna suck in the piece of paper or if it's gonna blow it out, which is my next step about this one problem I have with this build. So the blades are backwards in conjunction to the direction of my brand there, the logo. If I actually do this with the logo facing the proper direction, the airflow goes this way. In a custom standard build for my PC, if I had a regular case, I would want the airflow to go that way. But unfortunately, this thing goes that way. I can turn this upside down and fix that problem, but then my logo is upside down. In this case, luckily, I don't have to worry about that. It doesn't matter where the air is going or coming from. I have zero pressure to deal with. Instead of having to have some kind of pressured chamber inside the system to reduce dust and things like that, I don't have to worry about which direction the air is coming from or going. It's a luxury. The downside to this open case, if you've got cats, if you've got a lot of dust, if you've got dogs that shed really bad, you want to clean your computer regularly. That is gonna be something to pay attention to. Anyways, for this install, it just slides right on and clicks right in place. And it's done. Right next to the CPU cooling fan, there happens to be a CPU plug located at the very top of the motherboard. Just right there. In this particular motherboard, which is an Asus, for those who haven't seen the previous video, there's the CPU fan and then there's a CPU opt. So that is your optional CPU fan. I'm just going to go right to the CPU fan and go ahead and plug it in. And it's a done deal. You might notice there's a little white piece right here connected to the cable for the fan. Don't worry about that too much. That's for a optional fan control, which this motherboard controls the fan, so I don't have to worry about it. The next step in my installation is going to be my graphics card and then my video reader, which is going to be my Elgato HD 60 Pro and my Asus or Strix 8 gig graphics card. Because my HD 60 is much smaller, as you can see here, than my other one. Now, as you'll notice, this is a much smaller version than your standard PCI. If you notice, and I will turn this for y'all to see, right here, there's a long PCI slot and then there's a short one. Same here, there's a long one, a short one, long one, and a short one. And again, I'm just making this easy to understand. This will want to go into the short one. It's a PCI Express, whereas this would be the full-size PCI. So if you notice, put this next to this, you see the difference. Right here is where I'm wanting to install it. By doing that, I line up with which spot it's going to go to, and I can see that it's going to line up right here. I'll pull that out so that I can put this one in. This piece right here will go into a little groove, and then this piece right here will line up with the screw hole where that screw that just came out will go back into it. Meanwhile, this piece goes right into the slots perfectly. And again, you will hear a pop, and that's how you know you've gotten it in. I'll take my screw, pop it in. There we go. And that one's done. Next, we move on to the Strix. We're going to take this piece off so that you can see the full panel. That is what connects to the motherboard. Just find the grid that matches the notches and the length. And then on the back, you can see that's where the HDMI ports and so forth will go. On this part, you'll see right here, this is where your power supply will connect to it. Some are different. So this one, you'll notice there are 8 holes, but there are some that are 6, some that are 4. Make sure you know and make sure your power supply provides that. These days, the new power supplies, they have little connectors that might show 4, and then it has another piece that connects to it to add 4. One side note, in the motherboard, there's going to be this little thing just like the RAM cards. And it's a little notch that opens up and closes upon pressure. So I'm going to open it up by pulling it back. And once this gets in the right slot, it's going to go in and tighten up. And it should apply enough pressure to pop it and lock it. So here we are. Going to put that in space. Line it up. And it locks. Now to help support it, That's what these screws are for. These screws not only keep it from sliding out easily, but also kind of help brace it and keep it from bending backwards over time and possibly breaking your motherboard. Okay. And that's it for the graphics cards. Last but not least, my power supply, which is a Thermaltake 850 watt. It also is RGB, which allows me to do the colors the way I do with the Aura feature on the Corsairs, the RAM cards, and the motherboard itself. The Strix graphics card also has colors. So this is going to be an awesome site once it's all complete, up and running, and I've got my operating system going. So let's go ahead and install this. So I already installed the bracket that holds this up in place, but I did leave it loose on the back side just to be able to slide this sucker in. Now, depending on your case, you will want to consider which direction the fan is going. If you have a hardwood surface or some kind of just hard surface that this computer sits on, and you notice that your case has holes on the bottom, it would be very helpful for your power supply to be upside down, allowing the fan to blow the air out of the case. Now, if you're sitting on carpet, there's not going to be a lot of space. I wouldn't recommend that. Other things to consider are, with mine being RGB, it has lights where the fan blades are. If you want those visible, well, you're going to need that going up, or you're going to need it going out, facing the audience. This case has two options. I can mount it horizontally, or I can flip it sideways and have it mounted vertically. I choose to do sideways for this one because my graphics card is currently having to be horizontal. If I do a vertical mount for my graphics card, it would have enough space for me to be able to do vertical for my power supply. This is how it's going to be for the time being. Now, the power supply goes right up against the first bracket. There are 4 screws located on this side to be able to mount it to that. This mount is going to be able to hold it up during the time being. In a typical case, it's just going to be on the base of the case, and you don't have to worry about a second bracket. You literally screw it into this mount, which is on the back of your case, and call it a day. These screws that go to this power supply come with your case, and they are the typical screws that you would have that are 3.5 millimeter. With the screws lined up. This is where I made one mistake in the building of my case. This pole happens to be in the way of this particular screw, so I'm just going to unscrew it real fast. There we go. You notice I am going diagonal, so it's the 4 corners. You just kind of make an X whenever you are putting your screws in place. After all 4 screws are in, then you can tighten them all up fully. For this particular case, after the back bracket is secured to the power supply, the next step is securing the second bracket. Now, some of you might be asking, if you have seen it already or if you were noticing it just now, this little piece right here, I went ahead and installed because it is part of the bracket that holds the graphics cards if I decide to go vertical. I wanted to go ahead and install it now because down the road I will be making my graphics card vertical. It's just an extra thing that came with the case. After you have your power supply mounted to the case, it's time to hook it up to the motherboard, the graphics card, and the hard drive. With this particular power supply, it is a fully modular. That means there are no cables coming out of it when you buy it. It has all the slots in the back for you to connect cables to. That is by far the best way you can go when it comes to building any custom computer. You don't want to have a bunch of cables that you're not using because then you have to deal with cable management. How do you hide all those cables that you're not using? I mean, there's a ton of them. They're just sticking out like crazy. For this particular power supply, it did have a couple of color coding things to make things a little bit easier. It's red. And if you noticed, whenever I first showed the reveal of this power supply, it had a red back on certain spots. Well, color codes match. The shapes match as well, so that's a good thing to know. But this particular one, the red means graphics card, anything that's plugged into the PCIe slots. Along with those color coding choices, you also are going to notice the different shapes and the amount of pins that are associated with each of these cables. But you'll notice that they'll say CPU or they'll say PCIe. It's another way to be able to tell. This cable is interesting because this is one side that does connect to the motherboard, and then it splits into two separate cables, both of which plug into the power supply. So you just need to line up to the right size and you'll be fine. I think the reason being, this 24 pin could be a 20 pin. So it gives you that choice. Well, mine's a 24, so I've got to connect it to the motherboard. In the meantime, these two cables have got to go to the back of the power supply. So, and I will take this cable because I want to deal with cable management. I'm going to take this and run it through the slot that's right here. It's kind of hard to see in the camera from the angle I've got. But there are slots to be able to take your cable and hide them from the front view and put them on the back side of the motherboard. Now, because I do have everything mounted, I'm going to go ahead and lift this up so you can see. So I'm going to run this cable straight through, now that I've got it connected, to the other side as tight as I can and clean as I can, just because I don't want it to look messy on the front side. Next, I'm going to be taking the PCIe cord and connecting it to the graphics card. I'll also be connecting the Elgato. Actually, Elgato doesn't need a power supply. I didn't know that because I've never used a video card before, but I never looked at it either. Whenever I was trying to show it off in the previous episode, I didn't quite look at it and see if it needed one, so shame on me. So we've got the PCIe. We're going to connect it. After I've connected it, I literally can take the excess and push it through, as you can see right there. But I'm going to keep the rest of it because I'm just going to turn right around and connect it on the front. So you don't have to use as much as the cable in the front side. Now, I'm going to turn this around so y'all can see it better. That's how I'm connecting all the cables into the power supply. So I've got part of the CPU, I've got the other part of the CPU, and then over here in the red is your PCIe or graphics card connection. I have two more cords to connect for the CPU. Now for this particular cord, if you notice the way it's connected with these two extra lines, this part's going to connect to the power supply, but it's like this, and for me it actually is serving a good purpose for this case. This case is a little bit tall and I can't quite make it to my destination with just this, but by using this extension it does fit and I don't have to worry about it. So I'm going to go ahead and connect it over here. The CPU 4x4 is what it's called, and that's where I'm going to connect it. Clicks right in place. I'm going to take my cable and I'm going to run it through for cable management purposes. Get it through there and out of the way, and then I'm going to lift it up so I can take it and connect it over the top. Now, got to get both of these cables now. One of the connections is located right here where you can see just the tip of my finger, and the other connection is right here. So we're going to connect the cables to those. The large cable I'm going to bring through and connect it right here to this large connection. They match up. You'll just notice they're the same size, same shapes, and that connects. And that's how you know you're good. And all that cable management is going to be behind where you don't see it. The other cable, the smaller one that I was talking about that connects to the motherboard, we're going to connect it, come right through here, and connected. Done. And that's all it takes. So both cords are now connected to the motherboard. We have a cord connected to the graphics card. All that's left is to connect a cord to get it to the hard drive, which is this one right here. So we're going to connect one, and as it calls it, On the power supply, it calls it a peripheral. And so you're gonna wanna connect this cable to a peripheral connection. There it goes, and it clicks in place. For cable management, take it through to get it behind everything. This one's a little bit touchy because people tend to have more than one hard drive, and this one cable can connect to multiple hard drives. So that's a convenience factor. Let's say you have 4 hard drives. You only need one cable to reach all 4. So it really comes in handy to do that. And then I'm going to use the closest one to it. You can see my hand right here. I'm actually trying to connect it. There we go. And it's a done deal. It's in. On every computer case, there's always the front panel. You have USB ports, you have a power turn on, you have the light that comes on whenever you turn on the computer. Well, all of those need to be told what to do. And to do that, you've got to connect the wires to the motherboard. The wires all come with these new cases. They're usually tied up somewhere in the corner when you first open it up. Those wires look a little bit overwhelming because they're all very small, a lot of pins, you don't know where they go. This thing right here, itty bitty. You'd almost miss it if you weren't looking for it, but it comes with every motherboard. You're gonna be connecting all those front panel cords to this, because if you're trying to read the motherboard, it is a very small font. You're gonna need binoculars and bifocals together to read it. The location is way down here. Trying to find where you're gonna plug it all in. On this motherboard, it's way down here and it's in the corner. If I hook up all of these cables to this thing first, it makes it much easier. So that's what we're gonna do. I'm going to read each of the items, each of those cables, read what they are, and I'm gonna line them up with the words that are on this. And then I plug this in by matching up the 1 word or 2 words I can read, line it up, pop it in, and I'm done. For some motherboards, they come with an alarm that's separated. This thing will be connecting to this as well. There are a few motherboards though where this is actually built into it and you don't have to worry about it. I'm gonna go ahead and connect that for you guys. So first things first, we have the speaker. And we're just going to look on this little panel and we're gonna find the speaker. So we're just going to line it up and connect it. Just like that. It's connected, and now let's do the cables over here. After we have successfully attached all these individual power nodes, the power SW, the power LED, plus and minus, the little speaker for the alarm system, and the reset and the HDD LEDs, after you've connected them to this single unit that came with the motherboard, the location to plug it in is located right here at the bottom corner of the motherboard, right there. So I'm just gonna go ahead and connect that piece. Actually, I'm gonna hold off on that because there are some other things that need to connect. There's your USB, there's a USB 3.0, and then I also have an audio HDD. All of those are available at the very bottom of the motherboard. Some aren't labeled as easily as others. For instance, my audio HDD will go in the port that says AAFP. I'm not going to break down what all that means. HDD is your audio, it's your front port. So if you're gonna plug in your headphones through the front, it needs to be able to produce sound. That's where it comes from, is that AAFP or HD audio. Your USB 3.0 is a very large black device that usually splits into 2 cables. And then you have the other one that supplies all of your power on and off, your little buzzer alarm, which goes all together. And then last but not least, you have a USB regular, like a 2.0 or 1.0. And that would be a cable that looks very similar to your audio cable. Just plug them into the ports that are at the bottom with the respective names. Look for USB, look for U3 1G1. That's gonna be your 3.0. And other than that, everything should hook up. So I'm gonna go ahead and hook that up now on my side. It might be a little hard to see. I'm not sure if the camera's gonna pick it up or not from this angle. So AAFP is going with the audio. I just need to sync it up right here. It's a good idea to note you're not going to hear anything when you're plugging these in. You want to go straight down. So line it up perfectly with each little pin in the hole and go straight down. Don't be too aggressive wiggling. Don't come in at an angle, because if the pin breaks, you're going to be out of luck. It's especially good to note that with the USB 3.0, that sucker is tough to remove. There's been issues where once it's plugged in, when someone's trying to remove it, they pull the whole bracket out of the motherboard. And you don't want that. So if you do put it in at a later date, you need to remove it. Lightly wiggle and kind of loosen it up and slowly pull that out so that you don't break the bracket. So I'm going to connect my 3.0, then my USB, and then last is this one. Done. It's all hooked up. Every cable that needs to be connected is connected. I still have excess cable around. That's a cable management issue, and that is really up to the user, to be honest. I could sit here and use zip ties and clean it up. Any hole or groove that you can use for the zip ties to pull around and tighten the cables. Just having a clean line of sight with each cable allows you to know where it's going, so that if you need to remove something, you know which cable to pull and where it goes. But that is up to the user. You can make it look pretty in the front, horrendous on the inside. If no one sees it, who cares, right? We'll get the operating software running on it. I've got some new cables coming in to replace the basic ones, that they'll be black and white and a little bit of blue. And I think it's going to look really sharp. So once those come in, I'll replace the cables I've got, clean it up, do some cable management. In my next video, I'll show you what it looks like. We'll turn that sucker on. You can see the lights light up, and it'll be a real beaut. But I hope this video helps you guys understand what it takes to put the computer together without all the jargon that might confuse most people who build stuff. Watching Shadow Vibes. Hope you guys would subscribe. Be able to stay tuned for the next episode. If you got any questions, just comment below, and try to help you out as best I can. Again, I try to keep these videos simple. I really don't want to overwhelm you with the complicated terminology that experts use. Later, guys.